Could you identify poison ivy? In my opinion, this is really a skill worth having. And for those of you who have ever suffered from a nasty poison ivy rash, myself included, then you will know exactly why. And even if you haven't, they say that the more times you're exposed to poison ivy, the worse your allergic reaction can be. So it is something worth knowing how to identify, and if you have children in your life, you might want to consider teaching this to them as well. In today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how to identify poison ivy and also how to distinguish it from some common lookalikes, because there's no sense in avoiding some awesome plants if you don't have to. Welcome to True Freedom Permaculture, where we discuss natural living and how to have a green thumb even if you weren't born with one.
The first way to identify poison ivy is that poison ivy grows as a vine. So this is something really good to know too.
As a general rule of thumb, you never want to burn vines of any kind, just in the off chance that it might be poison ivy. Because if you are allergic, think about those oils, you're inhaling them and then they can burn and cause, I would guess, like severe inflammation on the inside of your lungs. And if you're camping or out in the wild somewhere, you're really far away from any kind of medical help. So it would just be a really bad idea, and you obviously don't want to hurt anyone else either.
Anyway, going back to this, the way to identify it is that it has 3 leaves, and you're gonna see these 3-parted leaves. They're compound leaves. You have one that points to the left, one that's directly opposite that points to the right, and then it has the one in front which points straight ahead, and it has a little bit of a longer stem. So this is always the first thing that I look for when I'm looking to see whether or not something is poison ivy. And then there is the common saying, leaves of 3, let it be. Berries white, take flight.
Now, unfortunately, I don't have any footage of poison ivy with the white berries because it's just not that time of year, but just know that if there are white berries and it fits the other characteristics, it's a good indicator it could be poison ivy.
Now let's take a look at the shape. So we already mentioned that they grow in clusters of 3 leaflets. Technically they're leaflets. And the leaflets themselves almost look like teardrops in that they are rounded towards the base and then they become narrower and pointy at the end. And the leaflets themselves can be anywhere from about 4 to 14 inches long. And they also have almost like teeth. You could call them toothed, teethed, but you'll see what I mean. So they're not completely smooth either. Next, let's talk color and finish, for lack of a better word, of the leaflets. So poison ivy is usually kind of like a medium to dark green, and people say that the leaves are glossy, and they can be, and that is a good sign that you have poison ivy around, but they're not always. They can be matte too. So don't let just the fact that you see some leaves that are not glossy let you think that they're not poison ivy, because they could be. Also, as far as color goes, although they're usually this dark green color, during different times of year, they can appear reddish. So when they first appear in the spring, they can be sort of like reddish green, and then they turn this actually really beautiful, brilliant scarlet in the fall. Notice the stem can have a reddish color as well. All right. Let's move on to how to distinguish poison ivy from some common lookalikes. The first one, I think, is the easiest one to distinguish from poison ivy, and it is Virginia creeper. Now let's talk similarities. It does grow as a vine, and also when it's first starting, if it hasn't developed all of its leaflets yet, it's kind of reddish and they can appear in smaller clusters at first. So I can see how this can easily be mistaken for poison ivy. However, the easiest way to tell it apart from poison ivy is that it grows in groups of 5 leaflets, not 3. The next common lookalike to poison ivy are strawberries. And let's take a look here. So first you might notice, oh, it's growing in groups of 3 leaflets. Maybe it's poison ivy. Well, let's take a closer look here. So do you notice that all 3 leaflets are completely connected at the center? So unlike poison ivy, which, remember, it has that trailing leaflet that has a little bit of a longer stem, for me, this is the easiest way to tell the difference. So looking at the leaflets, you can tell the shape is a little different. Although they're similar and they're kind of round oval shape, remember, the poison ivy leaves tend to get very pointy towards the end of the leaflets, whereas here with the strawberry, you can still see that it's pretty round. And also on the strawberry, you're going to notice it has like a very even kind of serration, if that's the right word, to the leaf edges. Whereas poison ivy, it tends to be a little bit more irregular, although it can be serrated. Now, another indicator is that strawberries if they have the berries going on, initially when they first begin to develop, they are white, but they obviously eventually turn red and become the wonderful and delicious strawberry that we know. Let's compare this with poison ivy's berries, which when they first appear can have the sort of greenish tinge to them, but eventually they will turn white. Finally, with strawberries, they appear to grow in a vine, so this one can be kind of tricky because they can make an excellent ground cover and they send out runners, but they're not actually growing on a vine. Okay, this one's a tricky one, at least for me. Blackberries. So obviously if there's the presence of blackberries like you see here, then that is a pretty easy way to tell whether it is poison ivy or not. Obviously, like strawberries, they appear white at first, but they will slowly turn this like reddish color and then eventually become plump and black. However, if there are no berries, you have to use another method of identification. So I think the best way to tell this apart from poison ivy is the way that they grow. So blackberries grow on canes, and so they grow more vertically as opposed to on a vine. Now, obviously if the vine is attached to something, it can also grow vertically. So you have to be careful. The blackberry canes are self-sustaining. They do not need anything in order to stand upright. Now, let's take a look at something else regarding the blackberry. So if you look here, you'll see that it grows in clusters of 3 leaflets. And I can see why people so easily mistake this for poison ivy, because if you look, it has a leaf in front that has a little bit of a longer stem, very similar to poison ivy. And then it's got the 2 other leaflets which are opposing from one another. And it's also got the serrated edges. So very easy to tell here. But you'll notice that that little bit of stem behind the front leaflet is green instead of red. So that is another indicator. And also you can look for thorns. Poison ivy will not have thorns. Blackberries will usually have thorns, but there are some thornless varieties of blackberries too, but that is another way to tell.
Now I hope when someone asks you, could you identify poison ivy, your answer is a confident yes. And in my next video, I'm going to share what has been working for me, because you hear of a whole range of possible products and plants that can help poison ivy rash, and unfortunately I have multiple personal experiences with poison ivy rashes. So I'll tell you the story in that video, but that is all I have for today, and I will see you all again soon.